We're left today. All right. First user. I'm not doing. Cindy, all right, come on, come on up.
Sure.
Good afternoon and welcome to the September Crop Production and WASDE briefings. My name is Lance Honig and I serve as chair of the Agricultural Statistics Board at NASS. This briefing is for the Secretary of Agriculture and other policymakers at USDA to better understand the content and context of today's reports. We're very pleased to have Dr. Seth Meyer, USDA's Chief Economist, join us as Secretary Designate today. Dr. Meyer, I'd like to share that we have a large number of visitors with us today. That includes a group of farmers from the Indiana Farm Bureau. We've got a group of farmers from the Iowa Farm Bureau. We've got members of the Senate Appropriations Committee. We have members of the Farm Foundation's Ag Scholars Program, some of which are in the room next door. And then we've also got a group of Cochrane Fellows from Malaysia. So welcome to all. Along with that, I'd also like to express our appreciation to Tyrell Doss from our Little Rock office, Ty Kalis from our Lansing office, and Alexander Robinson from our Olympia office, who came in to assist us with today's report. They're not in the room with us because they're leaving space for our valued guests. Before I turn things over to our presenters, I do have a few notes for our live streaming audience. The crop production and WASDE reports are considered principal federal economic indicator reports. The Office of Management and Budget provides specific guidance on how these important reports are to be released. OMB statistical policy instructs policymaking officials to refrain from making public comment regarding the content of the reports within 30 minutes of their release. Therefore, we will not be taking questions from the public during this briefing. Both NASS and World Board staff are available for phone or email questions, and NASS will host a social media event at 1 o'clock Eastern time today. We strive to have everything presented at this briefing match the official record. However, should there be any discrepancy, always refer to the official published estimates. With that, I'll turn it over to Patrick Boyle. He is the chief of the NASS Crops Branch. Patrick will be immediately followed by Dr. Mark Czekanowski, chair of the World Ag Outlook Board. Patrick, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. Welcome. We've got a lot to cover, so we'll go ahead and jump right in. The September crop production report utilizes multiple data sources to ensure comprehensive coverage. So before we get into the acreage and production data, I'd like to give you a quick overview of some of those data sources. NASS conducted 2 surveys at the end of August and during the first week of September. Our Ag Yield Survey included just under 6,900 samples. We asked farmers from across the country what they expected their yields to be, or in some instances, what their yields were as harvest is underway in certain areas. Additionally, as part of our objective yield survey program, our trained enumerators took measurements and in some cases collected samples from a combined 3,090 corn and soybean fields across major growing areas. We also took into account several non-survey data sources. These include yield indications based on satellite data. And as we did last month, we also considered the latest certified acreage information from the Farm Service Agency. One more slide on the data sources. For our Ag Yield Survey, this map shows the sample sizes broken down by state. States with the darker shades had the larger sample sizes. As you can see, for September, states in the Midwest and Great Plains had the larger sample sizes. As we normally do, anytime we want to highlight changes or key details, we included a special note on the cover of today's report. We wanted to remind our data users of our procedures for making acreage updates. As I mentioned a couple slides ago, we included certified acreage data from FSA as part of our analysis and made updates accordingly. Now we'll dive into some commodity-specific information, starting off with corn. This slide includes data from our weekly crop progress and condition report. It shows the percentage of this year's corn crop that is rated in good to excellent condition and how it compares to crops from the previous 5 years. As you can see, the red dotted line is this year's crop. Corn conditions have been holding relatively stable in recent weeks, and we are currently 12 points higher than this same time last year. Next up, some more data from our crop progress and condition report. This chart shows the percent of the corn crop that is at the dented phase or beyond. This gives us an indicator of how quickly the crop is developing and with comparison to previous years. Again, the red line is 2024, and while we're running slightly behind last year, we are slightly ahead of the 5-year average. Now, let's take a look at the acreage and production data for corn for today's report. At 90.7 million and 82.7 million acres respectively, both planted and harvested acreage were unchanged from last month, but down just over 4% from last year. Yield at 183.6 bushels is a record high, and it is up 0.3% or half a bushel from last month. It's up 3.6% or 6.3 bushels from last year. As a result, total production at 15.2 billion bushels is down 1% from 2023. This chart shows corn planted and harvested acreage over the past 10 years. The top line represents planted acres, while the bottom line indicates harvested acres. As I mentioned on the last slide, both planted and harvested acreage were down 4% from last year. Switching over to yields, this chart shows how the current month's yield projection ranks historically. The green line shows final yields for each year and this month's forecasted yield. The gray line represents a trend line, which is a moving historical average. As you can see, at a record high 183.6 bushels per acre, we are only slightly over a trend. Here's the breakdown of yields by state. A little orientation on what all the numbers and colors mean on this map. The top number is the current yield forecast measured in bushels per acre. The bottom number is the percent change from the previous month's forecast. If you see a pound sign next to the top number, that represents a record high, while an ampersand would indicate a record low. States shaded in blue are showing an increase from the previous month, while states shaded in red are showing a decrease. The deeper the color, the greater the change. States in gray are unchanged from the previous forecast. As you can see, we are forecasting record yields for a number of states throughout the major corn producing areas. Next up, a very similar map, except this shows the change from the previous year. You can see most of the Corn Belt states are showing year-over-year increases, while hot and dry conditions in the east and southeast have driven yields down in those areas for 2024. Here's a quick example of some of the satellite data that I had mentioned earlier. You can see the different shades there and the corresponding yield projections. Green and blue shaded areas indicate higher yields, while yellow, orange, and red areas indicate lower yields. One more slide on yield before we shift to production. I'd mentioned earlier that objective yield survey. This chart includes one important measurement that's taken each month now through harvest. It's an estimate of the number of ears per acre from standard fields in the major growing areas. This also has a comparison to recent years. The blue vertical bars indicate the number of ears per acre, while the red dot shows a corresponding forecast yield. You can see for this month, at just under 29,000 ears per acre, we are down from last year's historically high counts. Next, a quick look at the total production and how it compares to recent years. As I mentioned a moment ago, the production is forecast at 15.2 billion bushels. If realized, that would be the third highest level on record. Finally, the last slide for corn. A look at how this month's forecast compares to the sample of pre-report industry expectations. The way that this chart is laid out Each of those blue dots represents an individual industry member's published forecast of total corn production. The red square represents NASA's forecast each month. As you can see, for September, our forecast is slightly higher than the pre-report expectations. Next, we'll move on to soybeans. I have some charts and graphics that are very similar to what we just went over for corn. First up, from our weekly crop progress and condition report, the percent of the soybean crop that was rated in good to excellent condition. You can see that at 65%, this year's corn crop is rated higher than recent years. By comparison, last year at this time, only 53% of the soybean crop was rated in good to excellent condition. Progress-wise for soybeans, the percent dropping leaves is on pace with last year and ahead of the 5-year average. You'll note that on the chart, the 2019 crop is a bit of an outlier, and that's obviously influencing that average pace. Now, an overview of acreage and production data for soybeans from today's report. As was the case with corn, both planted and harvested acres for soybeans were unchanged from last month. Planted acres remained at 87.1 million acres and harvested acres stayed at 86.3 million. Yield at a record high of 53.2 bushels per acre is also unchanged from last month. It's up 5.1% or 2.6 bushels from last year. As a result, total production is forecast at a record high 4.59 billion bushels, down slightly from last month, but up 10.1% from 2023. This chart shows planted and harvested acres over the past 10 years. As you can see, the current forecast puts us at a level about 4% higher than last year on planted acres and nearly 5% higher on harvested acres. Next up, a chart showing how the current yield projection ranks historically. With a forecast of 53.2 bushels per acre, 2024 is a record high yield, although it's only slightly above the historic trend line. Here's a breakdown of the projected soybean yields by state. Again, the top number is the current yield forecast measured in bushels per acre. The bottom number is the percent change from the previous month. As was the case with corn, you can see record high yields are forecast for a number of major producing states. And again, once again, a similar map, except this time with a comparison to the previous year. We are forecasting year-over-year increases for most of the major soybean producing states. Another quick look at yield indications based on remote sensing or satellite data. The blue-green colors again indicate higher yields, while the yellow and orange areas indicate lower yields. Next up is another data point from our objective yield survey program. This time though, instead of ears per acre, we're looking at the number of soybean pods per 18 square feet. This is for fields sampled throughout the major growing areas. The vertical blue bars show the estimated number of pods, while the red dot is the corresponding yield forecast. As you can see, coming in at 1,746 pods this month, counts were down compared to last year. In fact, counts were down in 9 of our 11 objective yield program states. Next, a quick look at total production and how it compares to recent years. As I mentioned earlier, if realized, this would be a record high production level and a 10% increase over last year. Finally, our last soybean slide. This is how NASA's monthly production forecasts compare to pre-report industry expectations. Again, the blue dots show industry expectations, while the red square is the NAS forecast. You can see that this month's production forecast fell squarely in the middle of industry expectations. Now on to cotton. This chart shows the percent of the crop that was rated in good to excellent condition and this year and in recent growing seasons. Again, the red line represents 2024, and it shows that crop conditions are improved, especially compared to the last 2 years. On the progress side, this graphic shows the percent of bolls opening. It's 6 percentage points ahead of the 5-year average. Here's a summary of the acreage and production data for cotton from today's report. Acreage, both planted and harvest, increased slightly from last month, while yield and production both decreased by 3.9%. Again, like we had for corn and soybeans, this chart shows planted and harvested acreage over the past 10 years. You can see the year-over-year forecasted increases that I mentioned on the last slide. Next up, a chart that shows this month's yield how this month's yield projection ranks historically. This month's forecast is actually the lowest yield since 2015. And here's a breakdown of the cotton yields by state. Once again, the top number is the current yield forecast. However, this time it's measured in pounds per acre. The bottom number is the percent change from the previous month's forecast. And a yield comparison to the previous year. As you can see, Texas, which ranks first in cotton production, is showing a 12% year-over-year decrease in yields. Next, a quick look at total production for cotton and how it compares to recent years. We're currently forecasting the highest production since 2021. And now a quick look at a few other crops that are included in today's report. Chickpea production is forecasted as highest levels since 2019. Dry edible pea production is the highest since 2021. And lentil production is at the highest level since 2016. Peanut production is up 13% from last year and the highest since 2017. Rice production is also up compared to last year, but down 0.5% from the previous forecast. This is due largely to effects from Hurricane Beryl, particularly in Texas. Sorghum production is down 5% from 2023. And on our sugar crops, sugar beet production is up 0.5% from last year, and sugar cane production is up 4.6% from 2023. Tobacco acres are up 0.6% from last month's forecast, but remain the lowest harvested acreage on record. Finally, a couple of California-only estimates. Navel orange production at 39 million boxes is up 800,000 boxes from last season, while walnut production is at its lowest level since 2019. And here's a look at a few of our upcoming reports. We've got a number of livestock reports coming out in the next couple of weeks. On Monday, September 30th, we've got our quarterly grain stocks report, as well as our annual small grain summary. Looking ahead at October, we'll all be right back here again for the next monthly crop production report on Friday, the 11th. Also, we'd like to put in a plug for our fall data users meeting. This is an all virtual event and it will take place on October 15th and 16th. Keep an eye out on our website for additional information, which I've been assured is coming soon. Finally, at 1 o'clock Eastern today, we'll be hosting a Stat Chat social media event on X, formerly known as Twitter, where we'll take questions and share additional information from today's report. And that wraps it up for me. So now I'll turn it over to Dr. Jakanowski from the World Ag Outlook Board for his remarks.
All right, thank you. So I'll walk you all through the WASDE report released today. Same along with the crop production report. Just a few highlights. Obviously, this report this month, we incorporate all of the information that you just heard from NAS that we got this morning. We're also going to talk a little bit about Australia and cotton, wheat production there, India, cotton production, and EU. We'll focus on some weather concerns in the EU affecting especially the corn crop. So let's start. We're going to start things out with world corn production. So globally, production down overall this month relative to last month, driven especially by reductions in production expectations in the European Union and Serbia. I'm going to talk a little bit more about that in the slides that come up. Canada, corn production raised a little bit this month. That's based on Stats Canada data. And Russia, corn production down. Basically, that's based on yield. Hot and dry August poor weather conditions, especially in southern Russia, affecting the corn yield outlook there. So let's focus in a little bit on corn in the EU. So this is a map that shows the areas across the EU where corn is produced. And as you know, I mean, Europe covers a wide geography, many countries, and can have pretty different weather patterns across this region. And so what we're really looking at here, driving the reduction in the forecast this month, is this area of southeastern Europe, where it's been hot, especially since late July into August. These are average temperature departures from normal degrees Celsius. You can roughly get a Fahrenheit feel for that by just doubling. So anywhere where you see, number 4, that would be, about equal to a 8-degree difference in Fahrenheit temperature. So it's been very hot in this area. And just to also put it in perspective, really record heat. This is Serbia, so in that same region. That whole area, I mean, we're not talking about just slightly above normal. We're talking about really record heat, highest in as far as our records go back more than 30 years. It's also been fairly dry. So same, again, focusing in on that same area. Below normal rainfall, especially through August and then into September. And you can also see the dryness just in when we look at the rainfall traces for different countries in this region. This is Hungary. You can see things got off at a relatively normal start. Looking at that red line, that's 2024. And then the rains really just stopped toward the end of June into July, and it's been dry ever since. So that's Hungary. Similar, Serbia got off to really a pretty good start early in the season, and then the rains really came to a fairly dramatic stop there since July. Similar, Romania. And you can see the difference relative to last year as well. So hot and dry conditions. And it's showing up in the satellite imagery, VHI, again, focusing in on this area where it's just been hot and dry, and it's showing up as really poor vegetation. So that's what's driving that reduction in the EU corn production forecast this month. And also, it obviously also has implications for the other crops in that area, including rapeseed and sunflower seed. So now we're going to talk a little bit about the global corn balance sheet. And here, a few things to note. Looking at the back year, so the 2023-2024 year, so the crop year that is just marketing year that's just finishing up. Global trade reduced about almost 1 million tons, 900,000 tons there. That mainly reflects a relatively slow pace out of Brazil, slower than expected export pace out of Brazil, partially offset by better than expected exports from the U.S., which we'll talk about on the U.S. balance sheet soon. And then focusing in on the new crop year, the marketing year just about to begin. Carrying in a little bit higher beginning stocks this month. What's going on there? So lower beginning stocks in the U.S., more than offset by higher stocks in China, Brazil, and Mexico. Total supply down. We talked about our production down. We talked about that. Total supply is down a bit. Feed use for the new crop year. Down 600,000 tons this month. Couple countries to focus in on there. Lower feed use in Brazil, as we're seeing more corn diverted to ethanol use, and also lower feed use in Iran and the EU, reflecting a smaller crop there as well. Partially offset by higher feed use in Mexico and Tanzania. Tanzania is having a good crop this year. That's mainly white corn, and that is also showing up in the trade data, export statistics. A lot of offsets there, but one of the offsets is higher exports out of Tanzania, especially to white corn areas like South Africa and others in the region. Offset by lower corn exports from Russia, Serbia, and the EU. Again, Serbia, all reflecting reduced crop outlooks in those three countries. So U.S. balance sheet, U.S. corn balance sheet, going to start with the old crop year, 2023, 2024. Ethanol production, corn use for ethanol production raised a bit this month, 15 million bushels, just reflecting the latest data from the Energy Information Administration, kind of truing things up as that marketing year comes to a close. Also worth noting, our export forecast raised 40 million bushels this month. Seeing some really good counter-seasonal strength in our corn exports. And noteworthy, just to put that in perspective, fourth quarter corn exports this year, so fourth quarter of this marketing year that's just wrapping up, would be the highest in 6 years. And much of that is owed to Mexico as well. Exports to Mexico have been quite strong. So with those changes, we're tightening up ending stocks a little bit on the old crop year, 55 million bushels. So that means we're carrying in a slightly lower 55 million bushels fewer beginning stocks. Incorporating the production change from NASS this morning of 39 million bushels. Total supplies down 16 million bushels, and we've made no changes to any other parts of the balance sheet, which just means that ending stocks for the new crop year tighten up by 16 million bushels this month. We did reduce our season average price forecast for corn, 10 cents a bushel, down to $4.10, and that just reflects recent cash and future prices we've been observing. Let's go next into soybeans. Soybeans, again, starting with the old crop year, 2023, 2024. Argentina, soybean production lowered 900,000 tons this month. That's just Ministry of Ag data. Again, Southern Hemisphere, that crop only recently was harvested, even though, we're counting it in the back year. It was harvest finished up just a month ago or so. So those are fairly recent harvest results there from Ministry of Agriculture. And then Paraguay, production raised 500,000 tons. And this is a case, so another one of these cases where this is an increase in area. Use in Paraguay just exceeded our previous estimate of production. So given their volume of exports, it's clear that they produced more than we had originally thought, so we raised their production 500,000 tons there on area, and then given that higher area, we carried that through into the new crop year as well. Speaking of the new crop year, global production up 500,000 tons overall. Driven mainly by that increase in Paraguay, and also Canada's production up 300,000 tons. That's just StatCan. Balance sheet, really not a lot going on here in the global balance sheet in terms of changes this month. I will just note again, trade up, that is mainly Paraguay, higher exports out of Paraguay. And then maybe also worth noting also regarding trade, imports by Argentina are up as well. U.S. balance sheet, starting again with the old marketing year, 2023, 2024, just a few small changes. Increased our crush forecast 5 million bushels, just reflecting higher domestic meal consumption and soybean oil use for biofuels there. All that effectively does is tighten up ending stocks by the same amount, 5 million bushels. So that means we're carrying in a little bit tighter beginning stocks, 5 million bushels. Very small changes in terms of U.S. production this morning from the NASS production report, and essentially combination of the two just tightens up ending stocks 10 million bushels. So negligible changes to the domestic balance sheet this month for soybean. Now let's move into wheat. A couple things to note. I put up the old crop year here as well, even though that's now kind of in the distant past, but we did have some pretty big revisions from Stat Canada on Canada's wheat production. So that is noted there on the old crop year. And then with regard to the current marketing year, production down this month, 1.4 million tons, but that would still be record global production. Pretty big cut this month in EU wheat production. Now that's a little bit of a different story than the corn production reduction that I was talking about earlier, because in this case, this is lower production, especially in France and the EU, and it's the opposite of the corn issue because they faced extreme wetness, extreme rain and moisture throughout the growing season and also at harvest, and that's reducing their production outlook for wheat this year. Australia raised 2 million tons. We'll talk a little bit about that too. And Ukraine up, that is based on recent harvest results, data from Ukraine. So let's quickly talk a little bit about wheat production in Australia. This is a map of the main production regions. As you can see, New South Wales accounts for the largest share of wheat production in Australia, and also Western Australia is an important region as well. And the story here for Australia is that generally speaking, rainfall has been pretty good throughout most of the country, but there are some concerns in the southern part of the continent, especially in Victoria and South Australia. So the regions that kind of correspond to that oval at the bottom there. Some dryness concerns there. Shows up also a little bit in the satellite imagery, the VHI information. Very good in Western Australia. Pretty good in New South Wales and in the eastern part of the country, but some concerns in the south. And just in terms of where we are regarding the rainfall patterns so far this season in Australia, green line represents the rainfall trace for the current production season. And as you can see, so this is New South Wales in particular, a little bit above average throughout most of the early growing season. Now we're right about on average. But we're also at kind of a critical stage of growing. And you can see we put up two analog years here, 2014 and 2022, both of which started out similar to this year. But then from here going forward, weather is critical because in 2014, you can see that things really dried out and they had a relatively poor production year. 2022, quite the opposite. Rainfall accelerated and they had an enormous crop. So still a lot of uncertainty going forward there, but right now we're right about on average. And then Western Australia has been showing pretty good conditions all along and is on pace for what seems to be a favorable growing season for that part of the continent. Global wheat balance sheet. Beginning stocks up this month, 2.9 million tons. That is mainly reflecting, again, these revisions from Stat Canada, both production and stocks going back several years. So that's driving that. Global production, we talked about already. Feed use up 800,000 tons this month, mainly reflecting higher feed use in Canada and Australia, reflecting the larger crop there. Partially offset by lower feed use in the EU, given the smaller crop there. Trade raised this month 1.7 million tons, higher exports out of Australia, Canada, Ukraine, offset by lower exports out of the EU. Ukraine exports now, we raised them 1 million tons this month to 15 million. Russia exports unchanged this month, 48 million tons, and the EU was reduced to 2.5 million tons this month, reflecting their smaller crop. US wheat balance sheet, absolutely nothing to talk about, no changes whatsoever on any of the balance sheet components for the prices. Let's move into rice, global world rice production. Not a whole lot to talk about here either. Global rice production down a bit this month relative to last month. Australia, small adjustment there. That is just reflecting estimates out of ABARE, their official statistical agency. Bangladesh down a bit there too. Some experiencing some flood damage in their pre-monsoon crop. They produce multiple crops there each year. And then India raised 1 million tons. That would be a record, and that is based on an area. Record production again this year in India. And in terms of the global rice balance sheet, here again, relatively small changes this month. Beginning stocks up. That is mainly reflecting higher stocks in India, Nigeria, and Indonesia. Total use up. India use raised 1 million tons and partially offset by lower use in the US and Bangladesh. Speaking of the US, US balance sheet. So starting again with the old marketing year, 2023, 2024. Main thing we're doing here on the old crop year is truing up the ending stocks to the NAS rice stocks report that was released in August. And given that implied reduction in domestic use, so higher ending stocks, lower domestic use, also raised exports a bit. And the result is 1 million hundredweight increase in old crop ending stocks and therefore new crop beginning stocks. Incorporating the production change we got this morning from NAS, so 1 million hundredweight reduction in US production. Also worth noting, our import forecast was raised 1 million hundredweight this month. And that's all long grain, aromatic rice coming in from Asia, largely the kind of rice that we don't produce here in the US. And this is a pattern that's been going on for many, many months now. Domestic use, we lowered 1 million hundredweight, and that just reflects the kind of reaching back to our change from 2023, carrying that into the new crop year. And the result is a bit of an increase in ending stocks, 2 million hundredweight increase, but no change in our season average price forecasts. All right, cotton. Global cotton production down this month, 1.2 million bales. The US accounts for about half of that. We'll talk about that when we get to the US balance sheet. Also worth noting, China production raised this month, 300,000 bales, just experiencing some good weather. So that's a yield increase there for China. India production down 500,000 bales. Just a bit about that in the slide coming up. And then Pakistan was lowered 300,000 bales. That's a lower area based on government data from there. Uzbekistan has seen some pretty good weather for cotton. So their production was raised 100,000 bales based on higher yields. And then we got some country data from the African Frank zone that we incorporated and slightly reduced cotton production there. So let's quickly talk about India cotton production again. Geographic display of the main cotton producing regions in India. Also just worth noting, within India, they have a very long planting season. Planting is still underway in some parts of the country, and harvest will begin. Planting is still underway until October, and then harvest will begin in other parts of the country by November. So it's quite extended. And the main issue that's going on here in India, so the change that we've made this month is it's really entirely based on area. Just the economics are poor, prices are low. Many farmers still have cotton left over from last season that they're trying to sell. So they've been switching to other crops, especially rice, peanuts, soybeans, and others. So this is just an area reduction based on poor economics in India. Global cotton balance sheet. Old crop year raised consumption, 800,000 bales this month. That is based on some recent data from China. You might recall last month we actually lowered China's cotton consumption, but then we got some new data since then, which shows that their consumption is actually remaining quite strong, relatively robust, and we raised it this month back up by 800,000 bales. And then with regard to the new crop year, consumption reduced 500,000 bales. That's spread across several users, not necessarily China, many different countries there, lower consumption. Trade, cotton trade down 500,000 bales this month. China imports are down, reflecting their higher production. India offsetting that partially. India imports are up, forecast higher based on their smaller crop, and imports by Turkey and Bangladesh were lower as well. Regarding the U.S. cotton balance sheet, not much unusual going on here. Essentially, mainly just incorporating the production change we got from NAS this morning. So lower production, and with that lower production, we also pulled exports back a bit, tightening supplies, and the bulk of that lower production, though, it just means lower ending stocks. Despite those lower ending stocks, prices are still have been under some pressure lately. We didn't make any change to our season average market price. All right, let's move into sugar. Sugar balance sheet, starting here with the U.S. Quite a bit going on this month in the domestic sugar balance sheet, starting with the old crop year. And just as a reminder, sugar is a kind of unique in terms of the crop years because it follows a fiscal year. So the marketing year ends at the end of September, even though some of the harvest can begin in September. So what this means is, for example, beet production, cane production in this old crop year is actually harvest is being pulled forward from 2024 into the old crop year because it's the harvest that began in September. So that raises the old crop supplies by an equivalent amount and reduces the new crop supplies by the same amount. So it's just that the difference in marketing years that caused that shift. Similarly, TRQ imports for the old crop year, that reflects the fact that FTAs are based on FDA access is based on calendar year access, and we saw some FTA arrivals in August. So we pulled forward our TRQ supplies from the new crop year back to the old crop year, just reflecting those arrivals that essentially arrived in the old crop year that is not quite yet completed. High tier sugar imports raised again on the back here, raised again this month, just reflecting the current pace that we're seeing applied to September. And when you take all of those changes through on the old crop balance sheet, it means that we are carrying in beginning stocks up about 235,000 tons, higher than we had forecasted last month. Production down, so this is incorporating the changes from NAS, lower sugar beet production in particular. Imports down fairly substantially there as well. complicated, policy issues here. So as you know, September is typically a month where where Mexico access is estimated based on US needs, reflecting a 13.5% stocks to use ratio. But in fact, Mexico access is driven by the higher of the September US needs estimate or the July US needs. And in this case, the July export limit was higher. So that is what's driving Mexico's access this month and leading to a higher than 13.5% stocks to use ratio. So again, Mexico exports reduced this month, but the Mexico export limit is reflecting the estimate based on the July WASDE balance sheet. So that's where we are. And as I noted, 14.2% stocks to use ratio, ending stocks tightened up a bit this month relative to last. And then the Mexican sugar balance sheet, pretty small changes here overall. Just worth noting, still in the back year for Mexico, we continue to see some imports trickling in there, raising their ending stocks and consequently the beginning stocks for the new crop year as well. Exports are based on Mexico's policy of maintaining 2.5 months of equal to domestic supplies or domestic demand. And so exports are raised this month, but those all go to third countries, not to the US, because we've already set their export limit. All right. Let's next move quickly into meat and livestock. Working through the changes for the main proteins, beef production raised this month, mainly based on higher weights, and then that carries forward into the new calendar year. Again, here we're shifting into calendar year discussions. So for 2025, beef production was raised based on both higher weights and higher marketings as well. Pork production for 2024, fractional increase actually that doesn't even show up, rounds to zero. Higher slaughter volume offset by lower weights. And then for 2025, that small reduction in pork production just reflects lower weights there carrying into the new calendar year as well. Broiler production up. That's just based on hatchery data, and then continuing to increase into 2025. Looking at improved margin conditions there for broilers. Turkeys, on the other hand, I think the industry is still trying to get production to match demand, supplies to match demand. Production for 2024 was raised slightly this month, but still at 5.13 billion pounds. That would be the lowest US production since 1995. We didn't make any change for 2025. So prices, steer prices adjusted lower this month for 2024, just based on some recent weakness that we've seen. Essentially we have pretty strong supplies in feedlots and some packer concerns about consumer demand going forward, and that I think has been driving prices lower in the near term. And then that is carrying forward into the first half of 2025. We're seeing some lower steer prices there as well. Hog prices, small adjustments overall, lowered in 2025, mainly reflecting the reduction in beef prices as well. So competing proteins there, driving that lower hog price. And poultry prices, broilers and turkey, just truing up to recent price data there. Prices are still continue to be weak, especially on the turkey side. For broilers, we're anticipating some continued demand improvement into 2025, supporting the price outlook there. US meat trade, essentially what we're doing here, we're getting pretty close to the end of the calendar year and truing up to recent trade data. So for beef in particular, no real story, just seeing some strength, recent strength in US beef exports. And we expect that also to carry into the next calendar year. Also, we saw some pretty good export numbers for July in pork as well. The other item I'll just note, beef imports pretty strong, fairly strong increase this month. That's mainly continues to be imports from Oceania, but also South America. Over quota, the margins are such that it's profitable now to still pull in that beef from South America. And part of that too, probably worth noting that China beef imports are down, so that's increasing global supplies for the U.S. All right, let's talk quickly about dairy. And here, the story is pretty simple. We're looking at a situation of relatively tight supplies, dairy and product supplies, and strong demand. Production was lowered this month for both 2024 and 2025, reflecting both lower cow inventories and reduced milk per cow. Pretty tight heifer supplies right now, constraining that production potential. With those relatively tight dairy supplies and tight product supplies as well, strong international demand. We're seeing growing imports, higher imports this month on a fat basis, just reflecting tighter U.S. supplies again and strong U.S. demand. And also some strength in exports, reflecting strong international demand for some of our products as well. Moving into 2025, the only thing I'd note here, export forecast was reduced on the skim solid basis. Dairy export forecast was reduced as we were expecting a little bit less competitive position for the U.S. in terms of non-fat dry milk and whey exports, and an increase in domestic use as the strong U.S. demand pulls those products from the export market. And finally, dairy product prices can just generally be summarized as good demand, strong demand, and tight supplies pulling prices higher. Generally, across the board, cheese prices in particular, we're seeing some pretty tight stocks supporting prices there. With all the product prices higher, glass prices are higher as well in both years. All milk prices are up. Current forecast, we'd be looking at the highest all milk prices in about 2 years. And margins are relatively strong as well, given the lower feed prices. So I'm going to wrap things up there, and thank you all. Hope you learned something from this. Learned a little bit about what our thinking was going into this month's WASDE and some of the logic behind these numbers. Thank also to the folks who joined online. Hope to see you back here next month. And with that, I will wrap things up and turn it over to questions.